þekki okkur hvað við erum oft á tíðum aðeins sein fyrir að koma okkur á stað. En við ætlum bara að sparka þessu stað. Næstur á mælendaskrá er Kato frá Verne Global. Ísak er fjármálastjóri og einn af stofnendum Verne og hann er menntaður í Bandaríkjunum, Stanford og Harvard og hefur mikinn áhuga á laxveiði, sérstaklega í íslenskum ám. Ég ætla ekki að hafa þetta mikið lengra hann. Við ætlum bara að bjóða hann velkominn. Ísak, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Gunnar. Okay. Góðan daginn. Ég tala ekki íslensku. It's too hard. I've tried. My name is Isaac Kato, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer and co-founder of Verne Global. We have built the first large-scale data center in Iceland out on our campus in Keflavik. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the global data center industry and the role that the Icelandic IT industry and Verne are playing in it today. Before I go too far, let me take a quick survey. How many people in the room believe that there will be a significant international data center presence here in Iceland in the next couple of years? Okay. How many people think that there's no possible way that it's going to happen and it's a fantasy cooked up by people who have had too much rotten shark and Brennivin? Okay. How many people are hopeful and optimistic, but you're also maybe a little skeptical because you've heard a lot of talk, but you haven't actually seen much? Okay. So my goal today is to, by the end of this talk, pull at least a couple of the naysayers over the line and maybe make you guys believers. Because, in fact, for those of you who have been following the industry over the last recent couple of years in particular, there have been some ripples in the water, and maybe you've heard a thing or two about some progress that we or the folks over at Tor have made. Maybe you've heard a little bit of news, a little bit of buzz, but there hasn't been that much. But in fact, there's actually quite something real just below the surface today that is creating those ripples. And I'm telling you today that the international data center industry is actually here in Iceland today in a quite meaningful way, and it's about to get much, much, much bigger. I think even 2 years ago, you could very credibly ask the question, will the Icelandic data center industry ever really take off? I think that question is no longer valid. The relevant questions today are, how big will it be and how fast will it grow? And before I get into why that is the case, I'll talk a little bit about the basics of why it's a good idea to put a data center in Iceland. I suspect for most people in the room, this is actually pretty basic and obvious, but it's a good idea that we are all working off of the same page. So, why put a data center in Iceland? Well, as you probably know, the third-party data center industry, which is about a $12 billion industry, which is what we do at Verne, we sell outsourced data center services, is growing very rapidly. It's grown rapidly historically, and most people estimate that it's going to grow another 10 to 20% over the next 5 years, per annum over the next 5 years. And keep in mind that the third-party part of the data center market globally is probably no more than 15% of the overall market. Most data centers are still owned and operated by the end user customer. That is changing rapidly as people outsource more and more, but it's still fundamentally an owned and operated industry. Still big, though. Now, what's driving all this growth is, of course, the massive explosion in data creation and consumption. And there are a number of factors contributing to this. The most obvious is, the smartphone. Your mobile phone generates and consumes a ton of data: video, photos, transactional information, interactive information. All that stuff sits in a data center. At the enterprise level, you have big data. Big data is really driving a lot of data growth at the enterprise level as companies use these huge data sets, which they analyze to make much more informed decisions and run their businesses more efficiently. And big data is permeating everything. And we heard Lars from IBM talk a little bit about it this morning. But the next wave that is also going to drive explosive growth in data creation comes from what many people are calling the Internet of Things. So in already now, it's not just your laptop or your cell phone or your tablet that's connected to the internet, but it's things like your appliances, your dishwasher, your cars certainly are ever increasingly going to be connected to the internet, and they themselves have big sensor arrays, and they spew out a ton of data. That data is used to remotely do diagnostics and even to do some kind of control, and that stuff just spits out enormous amounts of data that have to sit somewhere, and where they sit, of course, is in a data center where they're stored, processed, and ultimately transmitted again. And I think the statistic that most succinctly captures that comes from IBM, because they estimate that 90% of all the data created since the beginning of mankind was created in just the last 2 years. So we're really at the start of a rather epic growth cycle. Data centers are a big component of IT expenditures, so it's well understood that they're a big cost component. Now, what is less well understood, I think in Iceland it's pretty well understood, but outside of Iceland, what's less well understood is that data centers are also a very power-intensive industry. In the United States, for example, roughly 2% of all the electricity generated goes to power data centers. And it takes a lot of electricity to run the servers, but also a lot of electricity to cool down those servers. So not surprisingly, the biggest problems facing the industry today all relate to power. And I'll put them in the overarching term energy risk, but it really breaks down a few things. First of all, particularly in Europe, electricity prices are very high and rising dramatically. So the cost of running a data center is huge. Typically, in a typical data center, energy is at least 40% of the operating cost, and usually the biggest factor, and in some places it's even more than that. Okay, but in addition to the volatility and the rising prices, you have aging grids, inability to access large blocks of power, which data centers want, and of course you have all the negative implications and eventually taxation related to carbon emissions. It's estimated that the data center industry will exceed the global aviation industry, so airplanes, in terms of carbon emission by 2020. So what are you to do? Well, as everybody here knows, enter Iceland. Iceland provides really an almost unique solution to the biggest problems facing the data center industry. It's a great place for a lot of reasons, but it boils down to the fact that this is, there's no place like Iceland in the world that we know of that has this unbelievable combination of very attractively priced, very stably priced, and 100% renewable electricity. You simply can't find it anywhere else in the world, and that is the thing that makes Iceland work. There's just no place like it, and of course, not only do you have that great power, but it's on a very resilient grid. Iceland's rated as having the second highest power quality in the world, and the same cannot be said of many traditional data center markets, for example, in the UK or North America. Free cooling is also a very important component of it. You can get free cooling in a lot of places, but in Iceland you get it 100% of the time all year round, and that dramatically reduces the amount of electricity and investment that has to be spent on cooling in a data center. And in a traditional data center, the ratio of cooling electricity to critical load electricity is often as high as 1 to 1. Here it's more like 10 to 20%. So as a result, we have built one of the most economically and environmentally efficient data centers in the world, period, here in Iceland. And again, it's just one of the rare places where you can actually do that. Connectivity here has gotten very good, certainly much better than when we started. It's certainly good enough to serve Europe in a very robust fashion. We'd love to see the Emerald cable also come down. I think that would blow Iceland open to North America and allow customers to do very interesting things like serve their North American and European customer bases from the same place. Now, we already have American customers. They already come, but I think Emerald would really accelerate that. Nonetheless, it's gotten quite good today to the point where we really don't get questions about the quality of the network from most customers. So if you wrap it all up, it makes a very compelling value proposition. So first of all, just out-and-out savings. We typically can offer customers total cost of ownership savings of 50% or more compared to data centers in traditional locations like London or Frankfurt. Okay, it's a huge savings for a big customer. But they also get an unparalleled degree of price stability, and of course they get the renewable power. What is newer to this equation just in the last couple of years is that I can now say with a very straight face, you get all this good stuff, but you are also putting your servers or building your data center in a very low-risk environment. And I'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. But we're not asking customers to take on a tremendous amount of new risk by putting their stuff here in Iceland. Okay? To try to quantify that value prop, if you were a 1 megawatt customer, which makes you a big customer, but there are many customers these days that fit that profile. A number of ours are already approaching that size. If you put your servers in London, over 10 years you'll spend $20 million US dollars on electricity alone. If you put your servers in our data center in Keflavik, you'll spend less than $5 million. So the savings are huge, and very few companies can ignore numbers of this magnitude. Okay? Similarly, carbon reduction is major. The DC metro area is a very big data center region, and if you put that 1 megawatt IT load there, over 10 years you'll emit 8,000 tons of carbon. Put it in our data center, you'll effectively emit 0. So there's huge benefit to doing this. So you say, great, that sounds wonderful on paper. It's a great concept, okay? But show me some results. Let's actually, show me some practical results. I don't actually believe that. It sounds great, but where are all the data centers in that case? So I'm going to try to convince you that actually there's something very real going on, and I'll start by giving you the very brief history of Verne Global. And let me say, this is a completely abridged version. If I told you the whole story, we would be here till Tuesday. It really is an epic saga with a lot of blood and a lot of carnage, but we've survived, and I think the good news is this is a rare saga that actually seems like it's having a happy ending. So anyway, the quick and dirty history of Verne. So we started in 2007. Hilmar Pétursson, the CEO of CCP, pulled me aside and said, hey, Isaac, you should look at building data centers in Iceland. And I looked at some data center investment opportunities in the United States. So I immediately understood the power of the idea of an Icelandic data center. And so I was with an investment firm called General Catalyst Partners. We got together with the folks at Novator. We brought in Vilhjálmur Thorsteinsson, who I know many people know, to be our chairman, and off we went. And we spent the first year principally trying to ensure that the government would lay the Dan Ice cable, because without Dan Ice, there is no data center industry here. Once that was in progress and moving, then we got serious about really growing the business. So we injected our first real big amounts of capital, and we brought on a fantastic management team. So our CEO, Jeff Monroe, and our CTO, Tate Cantrell, are both complete data center veterans. It's what they've done their entire career. They've both done it for about 25 years, and together they've built and run about $2 billion US dollars worth of data centers. Jeff was the co-founder of a company called DuPont Fabros, which he was there from inception through the IPO, and Tate was his right-hand technical guy. By the time that they left, the DuPont Fabros had gone public. It was worth several billions of dollars, and they were serving about 200 megawatts of IT load. That's how big they'd gotten. So Jeff and Tate really know how to build and run data centers. And we had signed up a significant anchor tenant, and at that point I actually joined full-time as well, myself as CFO. Our timing was immaculate. I think Jeff and Tate started literally 1 month before the Krepa hit. Okay? And if you guys were surprised when that happened, imagine how 3 foreigners felt who were just getting to know Iceland and going, what the hell is going on here? Okay? But obviously it was a shock to the system, not what we had, and it was not in any business plan that I ever wrote, but interestingly, we actually had quite a bit of momentum. We had this big anchor tenant on the line, and they still expressed interest, and we were still building through most of 2009. We had cranes going, we were building a big piece of infrastructure for these guys, but things just continued to deteriorate within Iceland, and the perception of Iceland as a highly risky place to do business just grew and grew and grew and grew, and finally, towards the end of the year, that anchor customer just walked away. And so at that point, we had no choice but to go into survival mode and try to preserve as much cash as we could. And we laid off most of our employees. We mothballed construction, which was just terrible, and we just tried to stay alive, eating bugs and dirt, so to speak. 2010 was even worse because of the volcano, and the volcano is 99% a perception issue, but you have to realize, to people who don't live in Iceland, it's a terrifying thing when a volcano goes off, and it really is a red herring. It would not have mattered to any of our customers if they'd been in the data center when the volcano went off. The power arrived, communications arrived, people showed up to work, not a problem, but it literally shut down any ongoing sales conversations that we had for a long period of time. Now, we weren't idle during this period. We spent a lot of time restructuring the business. We worked very hard to get the Icelandic government to reform the VAT code, and which is just an utterly essential component of all this. Without that, Iceland is just not competitive with the rest of Europe for a big component of the data center industry. And so we did all that. We succeeded in passing the law, and we survived through 2010. During that time, there were still people who were interested in the concept, but just getting them to take the leap was just impossible. But we entered 2011 with a renewed sense of confidence. You could already see that the Icelandic macroeconomic picture was starting to improve in a meaningful way. And of course, now it's doing, it doesn't feel good here. Capital controls aren't good. There's a lot of stuff that still needs to be fixed. But relative to much of Europe, Iceland actually looks pretty good. And so people were getting more and more comfortable with the idea of Iceland. And we still believed in the value proposition had always been there, but the perceived risk was settling. So based on that, we were actually able to restart the business. We raised more money, and we actually began construction. So one of the proudest days of my life was in early 2012 when we turned on the power in Data Hall 1 in our data center. After many, many years, we finally got it up and running. And it was just a fantastic day. 2012 was really, frankly, very slow, steady, linear growth. A customer here, a couple racks there. But interest was sort of building. And the other big watershed moment for us in 2012 was when we landed BMW as a customer. I cannot overemphasize the importance of BMW as a starting point, a key point in the evolution of this industry. It changed everything, not just for us, but for anybody who was trying to pull foreign customers into Iceland, because you're hard-pressed to think of a better globally recognized brand name that instills confidence. Okay? The data center buyer at big international data center companies is a fundamentally conservative person. Okay? They don't get rewarded for doing creative, brilliant things like putting their servers in Iceland, but they sure as hell get fired if it doesn't work. Okay? But once BMW came here, people could say, okay, those German engineers, they really kick the tires hard. We know they're conservative, we know they're thorough, and if Verne in Iceland passes their due diligence, then we can jump in the pool now. It made a huge difference. Selling became much, much, much easier after we closed BMW. And I suspect that Advania Tor had a similar experience with Opera. Okay? Those validating customers make a huge difference. So we entered 2013 with a good head of steam. We're now actually starting, the steam train is starting to move. We're scaling, we're adding customers, we're adding employees, and we double our capacity, okay? Things really start to accelerate in late 2013. It took us roughly 18 months to sell our first unit of capacity. We sold our second unit of capacity in 4 months. And that acceleration and that trend shows no sign of abating as we walk into 2014. This year we are going to grow significantly. We are adding unquestionably significant capacity. And between us and Tor and a few others, there is now unquestionably a very real data center, international data center industry here in Iceland. And it's only the beginning. The pipelines have grown significantly in terms of sales pipeline and the interest that we get. We have inquiries from around the world, not just Europe, but North America and Asia. And we have a real legitimate bona fide data center. Unfortunately, these pictures don't do it justice, but if you've never been in there, at least by Icelandic standards, it's a very, very big facility, and it's full of activity. We have quite a lot of people working for the company now, mostly Icelandic people running the data center industry, and I think since this slide was put together, we've probably added another 5 to 10 people. So we're adding people now, getting a lot of attention. People outside of Iceland love this story. We have coverage from the New York Times, from the Wall Street Journal, long-form documentaries. The story really sells, and every time somebody says something nice about Iceland, or about Verne, they say something nice about Iceland. Okay? and we're making an impact. So this was a really gratifying moment last year when Gunnar from OpenCarry told me, hey Isaac, I'm pretty sure that due to the customers that we brought in, they got their single largest history in the order in the 29-year history of the company, and they grew at least 20% year over year, driven mostly by the international demand that had come in, okay? So, and this is just the start, all right? So, okay, that's Verne. Why now? Why is it finally taking off? I'd say it boils down to one word, okay, and that's validation. We have spent the last couple years validating and de-risking the picture. As I said, Iceland has been largely de-risked because the economy is better. There are also third parties who are saying very good things about Iceland. Cushman & Wakefield's a big global real estate consultancy and brokerage, and they put out an annual report that ranks countries by data center risk. Iceland comes in very near the top, 4th 2 years ago, 7th last year. So Iceland is really viewed as being much less risky than it was before. The value proposition has only gotten better and better and better because electricity prices have skyrocketed. Since we started, UK retail electricity has gone up 43%. In Germany, it's even more. And of course, through the hard work of us and our partners and people like Advania Tor as well, we've brought in some great brand name customers who validate the concept. So that is really what has allowed this industry to suddenly take off and accelerate. It has been quite a dramatic acceleration really just in the last half year. Okay, so what does that mean for the IT industry here? I'd say first and foremost, it's a lot of opportunity. A lot of activity goes on in the data center. There are a lot of functions and roles that go into maintaining a 24/7 mission critical data center. It starts with the guts of it, mechanical and electrical engineers and technicians who maintain the heavy infrastructure, the transformers, the generators, the UPSs, the switchgear, the PDUs, all that. We take security very, very seriously. There is no more secure building in Iceland, and I probably would include Sedlabanki than our data center out in Keflavik. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of stuff around that. There's architects, there are design engineers, there's construction, and then there are a whole number of outsourced services that help us maintain the data center. There's a lot going on there, and keep in mind, we only do this little small bit here. All Verne does is the physical infrastructure part. We don't do any managed services. We rely on our partners and our customers to do that. And so there is a wealth of opportunity for the Icelandic IT industry to work around this industry. Whether you're doing data centers yourself or not, people want managed hosting, they want cloud services, they want telecommunications, they need all the business side around it. All that stuff needs to happen, and most of it needs to happen locally. And most of our customers are not going to ship people over, at least not on a regular basis. They wind up outsourcing it. And so, in fact, in our data center today, we have OpenCarry as a customer partner serving a number of our customers, but also Advania is serving one of our big customers. Nihari is serving one of our customers. You know, there's a wealth of opportunity for everybody. And I know you guys have hired a number of people to help service just the international growth that you're seeing. So I would say that this presents a lot of places for the Icelandic IT industry to play in the coming years. So, okay, I will, in closing, some informal advice. As you think about how you or your company can play in this new world, the first is to say, I would really invest some time and effort in bringing in the expertise and the experience of working with big international enterprise. Because the scale and the complexity is so much larger than most domestic customers, it's a different ballgame. So whether you're hiring Icelanders who spent a lot of time working overseas, you're importing foreigners, or you're outsourcing it, you have to bring in that expertise because the politics, the complexity that goes around decision making. When BMW makes a decision about where to put their data center, 40, 50, 60 people are involved in that decision. It's not a phone call to say, hey, will you buy some data center services? And it's not just on the sales side, but on the service side as well. OpenCarry, for example, has invested a tremendous amount of effort in training its team and understanding what the customer wants, listening to people like BMW say, this is exactly what I want, and learning how to operate in that environment. And I would suggest that if you want to take some of this stuff, you do the same. I think the other thing that will help a lot is, I've been coming here for 8 years on a very regular basis, come at least once a month, sometimes much more often. I spend every summer here with my family. We love it here, and I've gotten to really learn a lot about how business is done here. And I think the traditional mindset, the old school mindset for how you do business in Iceland is there's a pie, and it's Iceland. And this is my share, and this is your share, and I'm going to beat the hell out of you to steal as much of your share as I can. Okay, and that makes sense if you're only focused on this relatively small Icelandic domestic market. Okay, but what's coming now is orders of magnitude bigger. But it also requires a shift from brutal competition to a lot more collaboration and cooperation, because you have to do what the customer wants. We're going to have customers who come in and say, I want to buy data centers from Verne, services from Niheri, hardware from Advania, or vice versa. And you have to be willing to work with people who are traditionally your competitors. But I think if we do this right, there's a big wave coming. We can ride it together. We can build a new industry here. We can generate some great business and have a lot of fun doing it. So on that note, I'll say takk fyrir. Thank you for your time. And questions or? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, hold on a second. I've never questioned Icelanders' professionalism. It's just the experience of how you work your way through a very complicated enterprise, just to be clear. And I'm not also saying to import foreigners. I mean, there are plenty of Icelandic people who have worked abroad for many years, and one thing I like that I think is really cool about Iceland is people leave, but unlike a lot of small places, they actually want to come back after a few years. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Yep. Well, the government's been very supportive in some ways and less supportive in others. I mean, if there was a silver lining to the Krepa, it was that we actually had the time to really get to know each other, the Americans, the British, the Icelanders, and teach each other how we work together. And we invest a lot of time in training. One of our guys, we have an American guy who also worked with Jeff and Tata DuPont Fabros, who does all of the operational and security protocols. He literally wrote a library, and then he moved over here for several months to help train people. And today, the data center is run on a day-to-day basis almost entirely by Icelandic folks. So I think it's possible. It's just, it takes an effort. You can't just say, oh, okay, people are going to come and they're going to buy stuff from us. You have to invest in the training and the experience. Yeah. 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 It's a great point, Frosty. I mean, there are a million different engagement models that you can come up with. I think there are a lot of things that the Icelandic government could do to foster this industry that it doesn't do today. And I think it takes time. It's a new government, relatively speaking. I think there's a ton of goodwill and intention to help. But certainly there's a lot of stuff that keep in mind. If one thing to leave you guys with is this is a very, very competitive game. But our competition is with Sweden, with Norway, with the UK. Okay, it's not with other Icelanders as much or nearly as much. It's those other countries. They fight tooth and nail to attract the data center industry to their shores. And it's a competition, and I hope the government understands that and works to help make Iceland as competitive as possible. So, thank you.
Ok, þökkum Ísak fyrir þetta. Engum minna spennandi, komandi frá Danmörku, Kenny Boge, Apple Danmörku, hann fer fyrir viðskiptaþróunarsviði Apple þar og það verður mjög forvitnilegt að heyra hvað hann hefur fram að færa. Hann eins og svo margir aðrir, tónlist hans uppáhald. Bjóðum að hjartalega velkomin, Kenny.
Okay, good morning. Wow. Did I wake you up? Good morning. My name is Kenny. I work at Apple in Denmark, and I actually work for our enterprise team.